A violent storm doesn't always destroy lives. Sometimes, it strips away every title, every illusion, until only character remains. The rain came down so hard it erased the yellow centerline from the lonely stretch of highway winding through the Cascade National Forest. Lightning flashed across the sky in brilliant white ribbons, followed by thunder that rolled through the mountains like an ancient warning. Claire Whitmore tightened both hands around the steering wheel of her luxury SUV, her breathing growing shallower each time another gust shoved the vehicle toward the shoulder. Her navigation screen had gone black nearly 15 minutes earlier. Cell service had vanished. Every mile marker seemed swallowed by darkness. She had spent years commanding boardrooms filled with billion-dollar decisions, but none of that mattered on a deserted road where nature answered to no one. The dashboard suddenly lit up with warning icons. The engine sputtered once, then again. "Come on," Claire whispered, pressing the accelerator gently. The response was another cough from beneath the hood before the vehicle coasted silently onto the gravel shoulder. Steam drifted upward as rain hammered the windshield with relentless force. She tried restarting the engine. Nothing. Again. Only a hollow clicking sound. Claire leaned back, closing her eyes for a brief second. For the first time in years, she felt completely alone. Outside, towering pine trees bent beneath powerful winds, their branches groaning like old ships at sea. The temperature had dropped quickly, and the warmth inside the SUV was fading with every passing minute. She searched for a signal on her phone. No bars. No map. No emergency call. Just endless rain pressing against the glass. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Then, through the blur of water, a single flashlight appeared. Slow. Steady. Never hurried. A tall figure wearing a Forest Service rain jacket approached the driver's side window with calm, measured steps. Claire hesitated before lowering the glass an inch. Cool air rushed inside. "Ma'am," the man said quietly, his voice steady enough to silence the storm itself, "are you injured?" She shook her head. "My SUV died. I can't call anyone." He glanced once toward the smoking hood before looking back at her. His blue eyes carried neither panic nor curiosity, only quiet assurance. "The nearest ranger station is over 20 miles from here," he said. "And this storm is getting worse." Claire swallowed. "Can you tow it?" The man gave a small, apologetic shake of his head. "Not tonight." Lightning cracked overhead, illuminating his weathered face for a brief instant before darkness returned. "My name is Caleb Mercer," he continued. "I'm the forest ranger assigned to this district." He paused, listening to the wind as if it were speaking directly to him. "If you stay inside this vehicle much longer, the temperature will keep dropping." Claire searched his expression for even the smallest sign of dishonesty and found none. Only patience. Only quiet confidence. He removed his heavy rain jacket and held it toward her through the narrow opening. "There's a warm cabin less than half a mile from here," he said gently. "My daughter already has soup on the stove." Claire looked beyond him into the endless forest, then back at the stranger standing alone in the rain. Every instinct built by years in the corporate world told her never to trust someone she had just met. Yet something far older than instinct whispered that kindness sometimes arrived wearing muddy boots instead of expensive shoes. She reached for the jacket. Caleb offered a faint smile that barely touched his face. "Let's get you somewhere safe before this mountain decides otherwise." Before the story takes a turn, subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss what happens next. And tell me, do you think she should trust him? Let me know in the comments. Now, let's continue. Claire pulled Caleb's rain jacket tightly around her shoulders as they stepped into the storm together. The oversized coat smelled faintly of pine, cedar smoke, and fresh mountain air, a quiet reminder that some people carried the places they loved wherever they went. Caleb walked a few steps ahead, sweeping his flashlight across the narrow trail that disappeared between towering evergreens. He never rushed her. Every few yards he glanced back, making certain she could keep up over the wet ground. Rainwater trickled from the brim of his ranger hat while distant thunder rolled above the forest canopy. After nearly half a mile, a warm golden glow appeared through the trees. A modest log cabin rested beside a small creek, its porch light cutting gently through the darkness like a promise that someone was waiting. Before Claire could say anything, the front door swung open. A little girl wearing thick wool socks and an oversized green sweater smiled brightly from the doorway. "Daddy, I kept the soup warm," she called. Caleb's serious expression softened immediately. "Thank you, Lily." The little girl noticed Claire standing beside him and offered an innocent wave. "Hi. You must be freezing." Claire smiled for the first time that evening. "I think you are right." Lily stepped aside without hesitation. "Please come inside. Daddy says nobody should stay outside during mountain storms." Heat wrapped around Claire the moment she crossed the threshold. A cast iron stove crackled in the corner, filling the cabin with the comforting scent of burning oak. Handmade quilts rested across a weathered couch. Books lined rough wooden shelves beside framed wildlife photographs and carefully carved birds that looked as though they might fly away at any moment. Everything inside felt simple, but nothing felt neglected. It was a home built with patience instead of luxury. Caleb quietly removed his soaked boots near the entrance. "Bathroom is down the hall," he said. "There are clean towels inside." He hesitated for a moment before opening an old cedar dresser. "I only have flannel shirts that will fit comfortably." Claire accepted the neatly folded blue shirt with both hands. "Thank you." "Take your time," he replied. "Dinner will be ready whenever you are." Several minutes later she returned wearing the oversized flannel. The sleeves covered part of her hands, and the loose fabric reached almost to her knees. She felt unexpectedly comfortable, less like a powerful executive and more like an ordinary traveler grateful to be warm. Lily looked up from the kitchen table and grinned. "It looks better on you than it does on Daddy." Caleb shook his head with a quiet laugh. "I think that is enough commentary from the peanut gallery." Lily giggled while setting out 3 bowls. The rich aroma of homemade vegetable soup drifted through the room alongside freshly baked cornbread. Claire accepted the meal with quiet appreciation. She had attended elegant dinners served on fine china across the country, yet nothing compared to the warmth of this simple table shared by strangers who had expected nothing in return. Outside, rain continued pounding the roof while wind rattled the windows, but inside the cabin every crackle from the fire seemed to push the storm farther away. Claire watched Caleb bow his head before the meal. Lily followed without being asked. After a brief moment, Caleb looked up and smiled gently. "We always give thanks for safe journeys," he said. Claire lowered her eyes, feeling something unfamiliar settle quietly in her heart. It had been a very long time since anyone had made her feel that arriving safely mattered more than arriving important. Claire slept more deeply than she had in months. There were no ringing phones, no glowing presentation screens, no assistants waiting outside a conference room. Only the gentle crackling of the wood stove, the rhythmic tapping of rain against the cabin roof, and the distant murmur of the creek beyond the window. When morning finally arrived, pale sunlight filtered through the tall pines, turning the damp forest into a sea of silver and emerald. She opened her eyes slowly, still wrapped in Caleb's oversized flannel shirt, and for one peaceful moment she forgot entirely who she was. The smell of fresh coffee drifted down the hallway, followed by the warm scent of pancakes cooking on a cast iron griddle. Claire smiled without realizing it. She quietly stepped into the hallway, hoping not to disturb anyone. As she passed a partially open door, something caught her attention. It was not expensive furniture or elegant decorations. It was a simple wooden shelf mounted carefully against the wall. Resting on it were several framed photographs, each polished with obvious care. One showed a much younger Caleb standing beside fellow soldiers beneath a large American flag. Another captured him smiling beside a military helicopter with dust covering his boots. Between the photographs rested several neatly displayed medals inside dark wooden shadow boxes. Claire moved one step closer. She recognized the Purple Heart immediately. Beside it sat a bronze star and several campaign ribbons she had seen only during national ceremonies in Washington. There was also a folded American flag inside a glass display case, accompanied by a certificate bearing the seal of the United States Army. Her breathing slowed. None of these items looked displayed for pride. They looked preserved out of respect. Before she could study them any longer, quiet footsteps approached behind her. Caleb stopped at the end of the hallway, holding 2 coffee mugs. For a brief second neither of them spoke. His eyes followed hers toward the shelf. Without embarrassment or explanation, he simply walked forward and gently picked up one of the framed photographs. "Breakfast is ready," he said softly. Claire looked back at him. "You never mentioned you served." Caleb offered a faint smile that revealed very little. "That was another life. These are extraordinary honors." He carefully placed the photograph inside a nearby cabinet and closed the door. "The forest still needs someone to watch over it," he replied. "And Lily still needs her father." Claire searched his face for even the smallest trace of pride, but found only quiet humility. She had spent years surrounded by people eager to introduce themselves with titles, achievements, and accomplishments before offering a handshake. This man had rescued her during the worst storm of the year without mentioning any of them. Lily suddenly appeared carrying a pitcher of orange juice almost too large for her small hands. "Daddy makes blueberry pancakes every Saturday," she announced happily. "Today is not Saturday, but he said storms deserve pancakes too." Caleb laughed softly. "That is classified family policy." Claire found herself laughing with them. The tension she had carried for years seemed to loosen a little more with every passing minute. As they gathered around the small kitchen table once again, she glanced back toward the closed cabinet. The medals were hidden from sight now, but somehow they seemed even more meaningful. They belonged to a man who no longer measured himself by what hung on a wall. He measured himself by the little girl smiling across the table, the warm meal before them, and the quiet promise that every stranger caught in his forest would make it home safely. The rain finally eased into a gentle mist by late morning, but the mountain roads remained closed after several fallen trees blocked the only highway leading out of the valley. Caleb checked his ranger radio, listened quietly for a full minute, then clipped it back onto his belt. "The crews are making progress," he said. "But nobody is driving through until they clear the road safely." Claire nodded, strangely relieved that she was not leaving just yet. She watched Caleb pull on his Green Ranger jacket while Lily slipped into a pair of tiny hiking boots with practiced efficiency. "Do you always work after storms?" Claire asked. Caleb smiled. "Storms are when the forest needs us the most." A few minutes later they stepped onto a narrow trail glistening beneath fresh raindrops. The air smelled of wet cedar, moss, and clean earth. Sunlight filtered through towering pine branches, turning every drop of water into scattered diamonds. Claire had spent years inside polished office towers where every season looked the same through tinted glass. Here, every breath felt different. Their first stop was a small wooden footbridge crossing the creek beside the cabin. One of the support rails had come loose during the storm. Caleb knelt without complaint, tightened the bolts with a worn wrench from his truck, and tested the railing twice before standing. "Children from the campground use this bridge every weekend," he explained. "It has to be safe before they arrive." They continued deeper into the forest until a frightened fawn appeared near a fallen branch, unable to find its way back toward the trees. Lily crouched quietly without making a sound. Caleb slowly approached from another direction, gently guiding the young deer away from the trail instead of chasing it. Within moments it disappeared safely into the woods. Lily smiled proudly. "Daddy says wild animals are neighbors, not visitors." Claire looked at Caleb with growing admiration. He never demanded attention for any of the things he did. Helping simply seemed to be the natural rhythm of his life. As the afternoon unfolded, hikers stopped to thank him for clearing blocked paths. An elderly couple waved from a pickup truck after Caleb helped remove heavy branches from the road leading toward their cabin. A young family asked for directions, and Caleb patiently marked a safer route on their map before reminding the children to carry enough drinking water. Every conversation ended the same way. People thanked him by name. He answered with a smile and quietly returned to work. Nobody spoke about medals. Nobody mentioned military service. They respected him because of the man standing before them today. Claire found herself wondering how many remarkable people she had overlooked simply because they never advertised their accomplishments. As they returned toward the cabin, Lily slipped her small hand into her father's. "Do you think the road will open tomorrow?" she asked. Caleb squeezed her hand gently. "Probably." Lily looked toward Claire. "That is good for your job." Then she looked down at the trail for a moment before adding softly, "But I am going to miss having breakfast with you." Claire felt an unexpected ache in her chest. 24 hours earlier she had been counting quarterly profits and preparing for another board meeting. Now a little girl's simple kindness seemed more valuable than every business award displayed in her office. She looked at Caleb walking quietly beneath the tall pines, his steady footsteps blending with the whisper of the forest, and for the first time she began to understand that the strongest people rarely felt any need to prove they were extraordinary. The following morning arrived wrapped in clear blue skies, and for the first time since Claire had entered the mountains, sunlight reached every corner of the valley without interruption. Caleb listened to another update on his Ranger radio before slipping it back onto his belt. "The highway will reopen around noon," he said. "The maintenance crews cleared the last fallen trees about 20 minutes ago." Lily looked down at her breakfast plate, quietly tracing circles with her fork. "That is good," she said softly, although her smile did not quite reach her eyes. Claire felt the same unexpected heaviness. She had known these two people for less than 2 days, yet the little cabin already felt more peaceful than the penthouse she called home. After breakfast she walked outside while Caleb inspected her SUV. He tightened a loose battery connection, replaced a damaged fuse from the supplies stored in his Ranger truck, and after one careful turn of the key, the engine came back to life with a smooth, steady hum. Claire stared at him in surprise. "You fixed it." Caleb shrugged gently. Sometimes machines just need someone patient enough to listen before replacing everything. Claire laughed quietly. "That sounds like advice for people too." Caleb closed the hood with a calm smile. "Sometimes it is." As the morning passed, Claire packed the borrowed flannel shirt into a neat bundle, intending to wash it professionally and return it later. Lily immediately noticed. "You should keep wearing it until you get home," she said. "It still smells like our cabin." Claire knelt beside her. "Then I promise I will return it exactly the way I received it." Lily nodded with complete trust, the kind only children seem able to give without hesitation. Before leaving, Claire reached into her purse and removed a business card embossed with the silver logo of Whitmore Environmental Holdings. She held it toward Caleb. "If you are ever anywhere near Seattle, I would like to thank you properly. Dinner. Coffee. Anything you choose." Caleb accepted the card politely, glanced at it for only a second, then slipped it into the front pocket of his jacket without reading the title beneath her name. "You do not owe us anything," he said. "Getting you home safely is thanks enough." Claire smiled. "Maybe I am not trying to repay a debt." Caleb looked at her for a brief moment but said nothing. The silence somehow carried more honesty than most conversations she had inside. Corporate boardrooms. She took a slow breath. "Next month our company is holding an annual conservation gala in Seattle. We are raising funds for national parks, wildfire recovery, and forest preservation projects. I think people there should meet someone who actually protects those places every day." Caleb shook his head almost immediately. "I am more useful here. It is only one evening. Lily has school. We can arrange everything." He smiled kindly but remained firm. The forest does not stop needing rangers because someone offers a ballroom. Claire realized she was speaking to a man whose priorities could not be purchased, persuaded, or impressed by prestige. Before she could respond, Lily gently tugged on her father's sleeve. Mom always said heroes should let other people say thank you sometimes. Caleb looked down at his daughter with quiet surprise. The words settled over all three of them like the morning sunlight filtering through the tall pines. He remained silent for several long seconds before finally turning back toward Claire. A small smile appeared, humble as ever. If Lily thinks we should come, he said softly, then perhaps one evening away from the forest will not hurt after all. Nearly 4 weeks later, the grand ballroom of the Whitmore Foundation overlooked the sparkling Seattle waterfront, its towering glass walls reflecting thousands of city lights across Elliott Bay. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above perfectly dressed guests while a string quartet filled the room with soft classical music. Leaders from conservation groups, elected officials, philanthropists, and executives exchanged polished smiles beneath banners celebrating environmental stewardship. Claire greeted each guest with practiced grace, yet her eyes drifted toward the entrance every few minutes. She wondered if Caleb had changed his mind. He was not the kind of man who sought attention, and this evening was built almost entirely around it. Just as the master of ceremonies announced the final arrivals, the ballroom doors opened quietly. Caleb stepped inside wearing a simple navy suit that had clearly been tailored years earlier but cared for with remarkable attention. Lily walked beside him in a pale blue dress, her hair tied neatly with a small white ribbon. Their clothes were modest compared to the designer gowns and custom tuxedos surrounding them, but they carried themselves with a quiet confidence that needed no decoration. Claire's face brightened immediately as she crossed the room to welcome them. "I am so glad you came," she said warmly. Lily smiled. "Daddy almost stayed home because he said trees do not care about fancy parties." Claire laughed. "Tonight we are here because people should care about the people who protect those trees." Caleb simply nodded. "Thank you for inviting us." Before they could move farther into the ballroom, several guests glanced toward Caleb with polite curiosity. One executive leaned toward another and whispered just loudly enough to be heard. "Interesting choice for a featured guest. Is he one of the park maintenance staff?" Another gave a faint smile. "Probably a symbolic photo opportunity. Every charity gala needs an ordinary hero." A third adjusted his cuff links and added, "I suppose flannel shirts do not fit the dress code." None of them realized Caleb could hear every word. He showed no sign of offense. Instead, he bent slightly so Lily could admire a large display showing photographs of national forests restored after devastating storms and wildfires. "Look," he said softly, pointing toward one image. "The elk have already returned to that valley." Lily's eyes widened with excitement. Nature always finds another chance. Claire watched the exchange in silence. The casual remarks from nearby executives embarrassed her far more than they appeared to affect Caleb. She started to respond, but Caleb gently shook his head almost imperceptibly. His expression remained calm, reminding her that dignity rarely argued with arrogance. Moments later, the evening's keynote guest arrived. The announcer welcomed retired Lieutenant General Raymond Holloway, a nationally respected military leader and recipient of numerous distinguished honors for decades of service. The ballroom rose in applause as the silver-haired general entered with measured steps, greeting guests one by one. Claire prepared to introduce him to sponsors when she noticed the general suddenly stop walking. His eyes had locked onto Caleb across the room. The conversation around them gradually faded as General Holloway studied the quiet forest ranger standing beside his daughter. Without hesitation, the retired officer straightened his posture completely. Every movement became deliberate. Then, before anyone understood what was happening, he walked directly toward Caleb, stopped an arm's length away, and rendered a crisp military salute. The music seemed to disappear beneath the weight of that silent gesture. Conversation stopped. Glasses remained suspended halfway to smiling faces. An entire ballroom filled with influential people stood motionless, watching a decorated general salute the quiet man they had mistaken for someone ordinary. General Raymond Holloway held the salute without a single word, his expression carrying the kind of respect that could never be rehearsed. Caleb looked almost uncomfortable beneath the attention. After a quiet moment, he returned the salute with calm precision before lowering his hand. "Good to see you again, sir," Caleb said softly. The general smiled, his eyes reflecting memories that stretched back many years. "I have been hoping I would have the chance to say that to you for a long time." The ballroom remained completely silent. Claire looked from one man to the other, sensing that an invisible chapter of history had suddenly entered the room. One of the executives who had mocked Caleb only moments earlier cleared his throat awkwardly, unsure whether to speak or disappear. General Holloway turned toward the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "you have spent the evening honoring people who protect our forests, rivers, and communities. Allow me to introduce someone who has quietly spent his entire adult life protecting people first." Caleb gently shook his head. "General, that is not necessary." "It is overdue," Holloway replied with quiet conviction. He faced the crowd again. "Many years ago, Captain Caleb Mercer served under my command. His unit was trusted with missions that demanded exceptional judgment, discipline, and courage. Whenever the safety of others depended upon calm leadership, people looked for him." Caleb lowered his eyes, clearly wishing the conversation would end. The general noticed but continued with kindness rather than spectacle. The medals displayed in his home were not awarded because he sought recognition. They were awarded because other people came home to their families. A quiet murmur spread across the ballroom. Claire felt her heart tighten as she remembered the shadow box in the cabin, the photographs carefully tucked away, the cabinet Caleb had quietly closed instead of explaining. Holloway continued, "After years of honorable service, Caleb faced a decision that very few people in this room will ever understand. His wife became seriously ill. When she passed away, he was left with a little girl who needed her father far more than the army needed another officer. He declined opportunities that most careers spend decades pursuing. He resigned with honor, returned home, and chose to raise Lily himself while serving his country in a different uniform." Every eye slowly turned toward the smiling little girl standing beside her father. Lily looked up at Caleb with complete admiration, unaware that the room had become emotional because to her he had never been a hero from history. He had simply been Dad. Claire noticed several guests quietly wiping away tears. The executives who had whispered earlier now stood with lowered heads, unable to meet Caleb's eyes. General Holloway stepped closer and placed a gentle hand on Caleb's shoulder. "The finest leaders I have ever known all shared one quality. They never believed leadership belonged to the loudest voice. It belonged to the person willing to serve without asking for applause." Caleb smiled modestly. "I only did what thousands of other men and women have done for their families." Holloway nodded. "That answer is exactly why I knew you deserved this respect." For several long seconds nobody spoke. No music played. No glasses clinked. An entire ballroom filled with powerful people stood in thoughtful silence, finally understanding that the quiet forest ranger they had overlooked had never needed recognition to become extraordinary. He had carried honor so naturally that it had become invisible until someone else chose to reveal it. The silence lingered long after General Holloway stepped away. It was not the uncomfortable silence that follows embarrassment. It was the kind that settles over a room when people suddenly recognize they have witnessed something far greater than success. Claire slowly walked toward the stage, her composure returning one careful breath at a time. She looked at Caleb, then at Lily, and finally at the hundreds of guests who had come expecting speeches about leadership. Instead, they had just met it. "Before we continue with tonight's program," Claire said gently, "there is something I would like to do." She turned toward Caleb. "Several weeks ago, during the worst night I have experienced in many years, you welcomed a complete stranger into your home without asking for my name, my position, or whether I could ever repay your kindness. You offered warmth when there was every reason to close your door. I have not forgotten that. Caleb gave a modest nod. Anyone would have done the same. General Holloway smiled quietly but said nothing. Claire reached into a folder resting on the podium and removed a single document. Our foundation is expanding its National Conservation Initiative. We need someone to oversee field operations across multiple states, advise federal agencies, and lead wildlife preservation projects. It comes with every resource you could need, an excellent salary, a beautiful home in Seattle, and complete flexibility for your family. A ripple of admiration moved through the audience. Many executives recognized the position immediately. It was considered one of the most respected environmental leadership roles in the country. Claire extended the document toward Caleb. There is nobody I trust more to lead this work than you. Caleb accepted the folder politely but did not open it. Instead, he looked toward Lily, who stood quietly beside him holding his hand. He smiled at her before turning back to Claire. That is an extraordinary offer. Claire waited hopefully. But? He looked around the ballroom, then toward the large windows where distant evergreen hills disappeared into the evening sky. Every morning, Lily and I watched the sunrise over those mountains. Before school, she helps refill the bird feeders behind our cabin. On weekends we repair hiking trails together. She knows every stream, every owl, and every old cedar tree by name. Lily squeezed his hand a little tighter. Caleb continued with the same calm voice that had carried through the storm weeks earlier. The work you described matters. I truly believe that. But my daughter does not need a father who manages forests from conference rooms. She still needs the father who walks beside her through them. The room became perfectly still once again. Claire slowly lowered the document. There was no disappointment in her expression anymore, only understanding. Caleb handed the unopened folder back with both hands. Thank you for believing in me, he said sincerely. But I already have the job I prayed for. Every day I protect the forest that became our home, and every evening I go home to the little girl who reminds me why protecting it matters. A single pair of hands began to applaud somewhere near the back of the ballroom. Then another joined. Within seconds the entire room rose to its feet. The applause grew stronger, not because Caleb had accepted an extraordinary opportunity, but because he had quietly reminded everyone present that the greatest measure of success was never how much of the world a person could own. It was knowing exactly what was already worth coming home to. Autumn arrived quietly in the mountains, painting the hillsides with deep shades of gold, crimson, and amber. The storms had long since passed, but Claire found herself returning to the forest almost every other weekend. She no longer arrived with a schedule packed into every hour or a phone pressed constantly against her ear. Instead, she drove the familiar highway with the windows lowered, breathing in the scent of pine trees long before she reached the ranger station. The first person to greet her was always Lily, who would run across the porch with the same bright smile she had worn on that rainy night. You made it, she would say every single time, as though Claire's arrival were the most important event of the week. Caleb would appear moments later carrying 2 mugs of fresh coffee, his quiet smile unchanged by the passing seasons. Nothing about him seemed different, yet Claire realized everything inside her had changed. She had begun restructuring her company so that conservation projects focused less on publicity and more on supporting the people working in the field every day. New grants quietly funded ranger stations, trail restoration, volunteer rescue training, and scholarships for children in rural communities. When board members praised her new strategy, she simply smiled and spoke about listening to those who understood the land better than anyone sitting around a conference table. She never mentioned the man who had inspired every decision. One crisp Saturday morning, the 3 of them stood beside the little wooden bridge Caleb had repaired after the storm. Families crossed safely with children laughing, hikers paused to admire the creek, and photographers captured the morning light filtering through the towering evergreens. Lily slipped her hand into Claire's without saying a word. It felt so natural that neither of them noticed when it happened. Claire looked down, gently squeezed the little girl's hand, and smiled. Caleb watched them from a few steps away, his expression carrying the same quiet peace that had first welcomed her into the cabin. "The bridge is holding up well," Claire said. Caleb nodded. "Good foundations usually do." She looked at him and understood he was speaking about far more than wood and steel. They walked together beneath the tall pines while fallen leaves drifted gently through the cool mountain air. Nobody hurried. Nobody needed to fill the silence with conversation. Somewhere above them an eagle circled against a bright blue sky, and a gentle breeze carried the familiar scent of cedar through the valley. Claire realized she no longer measured her life by quarterly reports, headlines, or applause. Some of the most important moments arrived quietly, hidden inside ordinary mornings shared with extraordinary people. As the sun began to settle behind the mountains, Lily reached for both of their hands at once, laughing as they crossed the bridge together. Caleb looked toward the glowing horizon before turning back to the two people walking beside him. He did not speak, because some blessings become smaller when explained. They simply continue growing in silence. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all. True dignity never demands attention. Real strength never needs to announce itself. Honor is not measured by medals displayed on a wall or titles engraved on an office door. It is measured by the lives made safer, the hearts made lighter, and the quiet choices made every single day when nobody is watching. Long after the storm had disappeared from the mountains, its greatest miracle remained. It was not that one woman had been rescued from the rain. It was that 3 hearts had found a new place to call home. Thank you for being here until the very end. Your support truly means a lot to this channel. Before you leave, tell us, are you watching as a husband, wife, mom, dad, or just someone who enjoys stories like this? Share your answer in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe for more stories every day.